Welcome to another episode of the On with Shahan Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the channel to catch all the updates each week that we put out new content. Today I have an amazing guest. He's an entrepreneur, an author, an educator, and one of the OGs in the Bitcoin space. Please welcome Jimmy Song. Thank you so much for joining, man.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
Awesome. I certainly know you. I've been following you, what you've been doing for a long time now. I was at the Bitcoin 2019 conference. I saw you there. You're speaking at almost every event. You're one of the real thought leaders in the space, right? So could you provide an introduction of yourself for those that don't know you, that aren't in Bitcoin? One of the things I'm trying to do is, as this next wave of Bitcoin adopters come in, it's a different audience. And someone like yourself who's been in this space, seen the ups and downs, seen like the vehement opposition, like what's your background and what led you up to like kind of what you're doing in the community now?
Yeah, so I've been a programmer for over 20 years, and that's I started programming right out of college. Well, I've been programming since I was 9, I guess, technically speaking. But yeah, I've been a coder. I've been making money as a coder for a very long time. I discovered Bitcoin back in 2011 when I read a story on Slashdot about how Bitcoin had broken the dollar. And at the time, I couldn't even parse that sentence. I was like, what is this talking about? I don't understand what could break a dollar. And eventually I found out much more about it, and I learned about it, and I eventually decided to get some. Unfortunately, it was pretty difficult to go get Bitcoin back in 2011, and probably one of the biggest regrets in my life is not buying more Bitcoin when I first heard about it. Right. I didn't buy any because you had to transfer money to Dwala, and Dwala had and then transfer that money over to Mt. Gox, and everything took like 2 weeks, so right. I just forgot about it. Eventually, I did buy some, and in 2013, during that bubble, I decided, hey, I'm a coder. I should really get to know this stuff and learn what the heck this is all about. Right. And I've been in the Bitcoin space as a programmer, as an educator, as an entrepreneur, and doing lots of different things. I've published 2 books. Programming Bitcoin, which is more geared towards programmers who want to learn about the Bitcoin protocol, and the Little Bitcoin book. This is more a book for just a lay audience, people that don't know anything about Bitcoin, that are curious about it. The idea is to get them to understand it on a fairly short order. That's my other book.
Awesome. So speaking on that second book, the Little Bitcoin book, so how do you explain, if you had to explain it quickly to somebody, to a newbie, to someone like, not like my dad. My dad actually writes about blockchain and Bitcoin, but he's not normal. But like to another parent, like or somebody that's getting new into the space, how could you explain Bitcoin? Like somebody said, you don't have to know the technical details of email to know that it provides you value, right? So like at that level, kind of, could you explain Bitcoin to a newbie?
So the easiest way that I've tended to describe it is by talking about money in general. It turns out that though we use money, most people don't understand what money is. And when I say, well, okay, Bitcoin is essentially digital money. And in order to have something like money that's actually valuable, what you need for it to do is be scarce. If it wasn't scarce, then it wouldn't be worth anything. And really, there's up to now in the digital realm, there's only been one way to create some sort of scarcity, and that's by centrally controlling it. So stuff like World of Warcraft gold, or concert tickets or something like that. For someone that's older, that's a lot easier to understand. It's like Ticketmaster creates the tickets, right, and then they sell it online and things like that. Right. The thing that makes Bitcoin different is that it's actually decentralized. So and it's similar to gold in that regard, in that anyone can mine Bitcoin. Anyone with any computer equipment can try to mine Bitcoin. Now, it turns out that it's about as effective as trying to dig for gold in your backyard, right? Like you might find some, and maybe there are some really lucky people that might find a gold nugget here and there in their backyard. But
Right.
most of the time, like the people that are able to mine the gold are people that are very good at it and have access to places that are rich in gold. They're called gold mines. So generally, that it doesn't tend to be the case that people, like go and mine gold. And for that reason, most people don't mine Bitcoin either. But that's what it is. It's decentralized digital money, which we've never had before. And until Satoshi Nakamoto invented it in 2008, we didn't have it. So it's a form of digital gold. It's very literally like that. There's a mining process, and I can get into details about how it works depending on where what questions they ask. But that's
Right.
generally where I start.
Right. Yeah. And another point you make too is like it's native to the internet. That's another great thing about it. And I think what's really interesting, you mentioned scarcity. So my parents are from Lebanon, and in Lebanon right now, there's a lot of inflation going on. Bitcoin is similar to Venezuela. So I think like right now, similar to the crisis in which Bitcoin was created, there's another crisis going on now. And it's becoming evident with all of these different countries printing their currencies, why something like this will be valuable. So in terms of how things are going on right now in the world, how does Bitcoin play into what's going on, or how is it impacting, or how can it be useful for people in this kind of time?
Hmm. Well, I mean, it's useful in a lot of ways, but the reason why you're seeing inflation in places like Lebanon and Turkey and various third world countries is because somebody controls the currency. It's centralized, and that's a point that a lot of people don't really realize. If you've played video games or MMORPGs or something like that, you know that as they print more money, that the thing becomes less valuable. If at the beginning, I think the worst inflation was like Ultima Online or something like that, where it used to be worth a lot, and then there just weren't enough places for the gold to go, and like managing an economy like that, it turns out, is actually quite difficult from a centralized perspective. So that's why that happens. The reason why Bitcoin has a lot of value right now, and the reason why people are talking about it and thinking about it, especially in a crisis like this, is that it's not controlled by anybody. It's decentralized in the sense that anyone can try to go and get Bitcoin. Right. But no matter how hard they try, you cannot get over a 21 million limit of Bitcoin. Like you could have infinite computing power and you cannot get over 21 million Bitcoin. That's just how it is. And that's a very powerful quality, because in a sense, like even gold, if a gold asteroid hit Earth or something like that, price of gold would go down almost instantly because there would be a much larger supply. Right. So in a sense, Bitcoin is scarcer than any sort of physical thing that we've ever seen. And what Safedine Amos would say is that this is the hardest money that has ever existed, which is quite remarkable if you think about it. And because of that, it's because the scarcity is more guaranteed than anything else that we've seen. The result is that it's a good place to store your value, because you're guaranteed at least that scarcity. You're not guaranteed that it'll stay the same value necessarily, especially relative to something else. But that's the main reason I think people are looking at it.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And when I initially got in, I got into Bitcoin like end of 2016, early 2017. And when I made a good amount of money, and it's the first time I made that kind of money on investment. And then, like many people, I converted into alts, and I learned many, many lessons at that time of like, do not do that. And now most of my holdings are in Bitcoin, and there's a strategic projects that I'm taking a look at. But I know your stance on this. And one of the things you tweeted was that Bitcoin dominance will be at 75% plus by the end of the year. So curious to get your thoughts. Is there a place for alts in the future for something? Where do you think Bitcoin is going to be 2020, 2021, and the alt space? Like, do you think like if there was legitimacy behind it and it wasn't these garbage projects, which are 99% garbage, is there room for alts or something like that in your opinion?
It's hard to say. I'm pretty down on alts, mostly because they don't have the one feature that makes Bitcoin interesting, and it's that it's decentralized. All of these other things are centralized. If you have an ICO, a token generation event, or like a pre-mine or anything like that, by definition, it's centralized.
Right.
And all of these projects, as far as I can tell, are centralized. Like Bitcoin almost had an immaculate birth. It's the only one that's decentralized out of those. Is there room for something that's centralized that somebody might find some value doing? Possibly. I haven't seen it though. Almost always, if you're going to centralize, it's much more efficient to like have a database that does all of that. You can
Right.
upgrade it and change things and meet market demands and whatever. The one thing that alts have going for it that like traditional businesses don't is the ability to sell equity to the public while avoiding SEC scrutiny,
Right.
which is really their only one. They're all one-trick ponies in that regard. That's the one thing that they have that you know a traditional business doesn't. If they were allowed to do that, then they would lose like almost instantly. So to me, it's just a matter of time before a lot of these projects, like their central single points of failure, get weeded out and they dump. Now, is it gonna get to 75% Bitcoin dominance index? I don't know. It's hard to say because like that metric is actually quite difficult to measure, just based on like what coins exist and which ones you count and things like that. So
Right.
many claim to be quote unquote cryptocurrencies, but like a lot of them are really no better than a centralized database. Like they're almost literally like that. Something like IOTA, for example, they have like a central service that went down for a whole month and nobody could transact in IOTA, and like that's very literally a single database somewhere in the IOTA offices that was running that was down. So I mean that tells you that these things like they seem very naturally scammy to me, and it's their one advantage that they have is it lends itself extremely well to scam. So yeah.
Yes, and that's totally true. And for those listening, be very, very, very careful. If you don't know what you're researching or what you're buying, why would you buy it? Don't buy it. Don't make the mistakes I did. I agree with that. Most of these things, and it's crazy because I came from the venture space, the startup space, and just to think that how much money is being poured into things that really have no product, no working, functioning product, no value, no business model, getting that much attention is crazy, and people paid the price. But I think now we have a bit more research. So kind of pivoting on that, as I talk to different people about Bitcoin, since that time, as a few years ago where I entered the space, it's different people that I'm talking to, but I'm still getting vehement opposition, like almost religious opposition in terms of how stupid this is. Jamie Dimon, this is a fraud. Now he's banking Gemini and Coinbase. Like all these people go through these cycles. But why do you think there's like almost like a religious opposition to this things? Because it changes the way we think about everything. Do you think it's just changing kind of how we think about money? And if people don't understand it, they want to push it away initially. I mean, you've seen us go through, like if you think about Crossing the Chasm, that book, from the early adopters to the early majority, now moving into, more of the masses coming in. Why do you think there is that kind of opposition?
Yeah, so there's two sort of camps of opposition, right? Like there are the people that are what I would call no coiners that don't own anything, and they've been vehement against it for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the shit coiners, the people that are saying, oh, blockchain's going to change everything and so on. I mean, I think they're both equally wrong. But let's talk. I think your question is more towards no coiners, and for them, at least from what I've observed, it challenges their identity and worldview. So there, even amongst the no coiners, there's multiple types, right? You have the Peter Schiffs of the world, the people that are very into gold, that can't see past gold being the only basis for any sort of uh, you know decentralized currency. And then there are other people that are part of the traditional financial system, the Paul Krugmans of the world, that think, oh, like this just doesn't work. So for the Peter Schiffs and stuff, people, they identify very strongly with gold. It's part of their identity, and it's very hard for them to let go of that. There are people that do cross from gold to Bitcoin, and certainly a lot of libertarians have. And it's sad that people like Peter Schiff don't, despite, like Peter knew about it in like 2011. The fact that he didn't get into it then must be a very bitter pill to swallow.
Right.
For other people like Paul Krugman, the Austrian economic aspect of Bitcoin is the thing that's challenging to them, because they want to believe that central banks, by controlling the supply of money and so on, can manage an economy and create wealth where there was none. I mean, from an Austrian perspective, which I think is the correct one, that's complete bunk, and you can't get something for nothing, and that all you're doing is redistributing the wealth of people around you, so to better fit your cronies and stuff. So for them, their vehemence again is tied to their identity, which is more on the liberal side, I would say. But even there, like, there are people that actually do own Bitcoin. They don't like banks, and they realize that something is seriously wrong, especially if you're looking outside of the United States. So I mostly I find this much more common among older adults, and it tends to be that way because it's a way to express their fear in a way that doesn't seem weak. Is my conclusion. Most people don't like, especially as you get older, you don't like learning new things, or getting, like, if there's one way that you've done it, like the prospect of doing it a completely different way is very scary. Whereas for somebody that's under 30, they played World of Warcraft or something like that. It's not a very hard transition. But if you're 70 years old, can't type more than 20 words per minute or something like that, this is extremely intimidating. So the arguments that you tend to get are not necessarily against Bitcoin per se. It's more rationalizing their fear.
Right. Man, that was spot on. Yeah, absolutely. I think you articulated that very well. And I think that's the same thing, that because our politicians are older too, that's tough and for them to adopt. Some are, adopting, like Andrew Yang was very vocal about it, for example. And I thought it's very interesting, the U.S.'s stance on this. It makes sense. I mean, the U.S. currency is a big part of why the U.S. is powerful. Do you think that the U.S. government itself, or the state level, or whatever level of government, will get involved in Bitcoin in some way? Do you see there being some, crossing into this traditional money?
I mean, there's already, various branches of government that are doing something. The U.S. Marshals, seized a lot of Bitcoin from Ross Ulbricht, for example, and they sold it over a long period of time. I think last I heard, they're looking for a contractor to manage their Bitcoin holdings or whatever they see, so that they can sell it in some reasonable way. So, I mean, that's just one example. I'm sure there's a lot more. I think Coinbase is trying to sell chain analysis services to the DEA and the IRS and things like that. So, interactions with Bitcoin are inevitable, right? I'm like an expert witness in a case that's got Bitcoin involved and things like that. So, it's just kind of going to happen no matter what. the question is whether the Fed, which isn't exactly government, it's not exactly private either. So it's like somewhere between public and private. It's whether or not the Fed would ever put Bitcoin on its balance sheet. And there's a pretty good article on the game theory of central banks starting to use Bitcoin as part of their reserves. And it's we don't know of any central banks that have accumulated Bitcoin. But once it starts, like, you better get on the train right away, because the first central bank to do it will get so much more bang for the buck than anyone that comes later. And the fact that it's a politically neutral money makes it very attractive, especially for countries that don't like being under the dollar hegemony. And that's one of the things that's very uncomfortable for people, especially on the left, when they realize, okay, well, the oppression that a lot of these third world countries get is straight from the dollar. The fact that their currency has liquidity against almost nothing else means that they're beholden to the dollar, and they have to keep a peg to the dollar, and then they have to export essentially to the United States. And it's crazy that you can have a transfer between of money between Lebanon and, like, say, Turkey, something like that, and the only way to really do it is to convert the Lebanese currency to the dollar and then back to the Turkish currency. And you end up paying some insane fees in order to do it. So every time any currency transaction like that happens, some New York banker makes money, which is kind of like, what? Like, something is really wrong here, right? Like, and that's part of the current system that we're under. Once you're under Bitcoin, or if you do convert more from a dollar standard to a Bitcoin standard, a lot of these problems go away. So I think it's inevitable that it will. Who'll make the first move and when that'll happen, that's I don't know if I can really speak about that very intelligently.
Yeah, no, I think that's some great insight. And I asked the audience if they had any questions for you. And I think you might know this person, but I got a question from Gabe Higgins from Block Spaces. And he says, when does he think, as in you, Jimmy, we'll see Schnorr? I'm not technical, so if I Schnorr signatures and Taproot, Graftroot on mainnet.
Yeah, so Taproot and Schnorr are technical improvements to the Bitcoin protocol. It's the next soft fork. It allows something called signature aggregation, and through the use of some other techniques, pub key aggregation. So it can save a lot of block space, for example. So instead of having what you would call the multi-sig penalty, right now, if you're using multi-sig, 2 of 3 multi-sig, 5 of 7 multi-sig, whatever it is, you're paying a penalty because you have to show each pub key and each signature, and that's it's a lot more data. That means you have to pay more fees. Using Schnorr, and Taproot, you no longer have that penalty, and it makes it a lot easier to save money essentially, or it incentivizes good security, and multi-sig is definitely good security. So that's what it is. When is it going to get in? Well, I had predicted that it would get in this year. It's taking a lot longer because of some fundamental changes that were made to the spec within fairly late in the process. So a few months ago, Peter Woola, who's the author of that, Bitcoin improvement proposal, changed up a few of the things, and all of those changes need to get reviewed again. So it's going to take some time. I suspect it's going to be by the end of 2021-ish that it gets in, but I'm not really sure.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate the answer. So how can we follow you? How can the audience follow you? What are some ways we could stay connected or get involved with what you're doing? You mentioned some of the books, your website. I'll make sure to put all the links to that. But anything else, Twitter, any other places we should follow you?
Yeah, Twitter at Jimmy Song, Medium at Jimmy Song. I have a newsletter that I send out every week, jimmysong.substack.com. It's all the news, mostly technical, some economic. That's happening on Bitcoin. And you can follow me on GitHub at Jimmy Song as well. And my website is programmingblockchain.com.
Awesome. You heard it here. Jimmy, thank you so much, man, for joining the podcast. I really appreciate it.